This will be probably one of the most momentous days in the history of our nation and this parliament. We are looking at passing a piece of legislation that will enable the people of this nation to go to a referendum on a voice to parliament. As I've travelled around the country and spoken to a lot of Australians, they are still very, very confused about what this means to them and future generations. Some of the speakers today in this chamber, I cannot and will not agree with them. But as I look around the chamber and the people in the galleries, I see people of all different cultural backgrounds, all different races, people that have migrated to this country for a better way of life. This nation was founded on the Westminster system of government after it was settled by the English. Yes, we all acknowledge there were other people at the time in this nation. But it's been on the backbone of the, as people say, the colonialists, the convicts, the people who came here. Many came here, dragged here from England and other places against their will. They were the stolen generation as well. Many atrocities have happened over the period of time, and we have not acknowledged that. We can't change it, but we have acknowledged it. Our country has grown with a parliamentary system that was started, the same system in England, with a parliament, with people elected based on their dedication, passion, those people wanting to make changes for the betterment of this country. Those opportunities have been afforded to anyone, whether it be people born here, migrants, refugees, and even the Indigenous Australian. To say that they've never had a voice is truly untrue. It's not the truth. We have Indigenous people sitting in this parliament based on their ability and their dedication, hold their seats in this place with pride, representing not only their own cultural background and trying to represent them, but for all Australians. The same as I do. My cultural background may be of English-Irish, but my responsibility in this place is to all Australians, regardless of race, colour, creed. To raise issues, as Senator Pocock has, and saying a lot of these questions haven't been answered, you've got problems out there. This comes from a senator that on many occasions to do with legislation hasn't consulted with the people, hasn't consulted with businesses, has just supported legislation. And yet he dares to question the fact that there was consultation that went on. It never did. At Uluru, it never did. It was a bunch of academics that went out there. The Aboriginals that I have visited in some of these communities haven't even been consulted. They have no idea what's going on. And I'm sure Senator Price will back me up with this. When we talk about the problems, billions and billions of dollars have been thrown at it over the years. I've spoken about it since I first came to Parliament in 1996. The money has not got to where it has needed to go. You've had your bodies. You've got over 3,200 Aboriginal corporations and bodies. You've got a department that's set up under the previous government, the NIAA, $4.5 billion a year. You handed out over $1 billion in grants in 1 year to 1,500. You've got all the other government departments handing out $11.5 billion in grants. Where has the money gone? That's the question you need to ask yourselves. Where has the money gone? Who have you put in charge of it? Is the fox in charge of the hen house? And yet you turn around and you want to blame everyone else who is not Aboriginal or Indigenous in this nation for the faults that maybe you should look in your own backyard and question yourselves. Why hasn't things changed? You know, you talk about the stolen generation. Yes, it did happen at the time. Ask yourself why. A lot of these children would not have survived if they were not taken away from their families. And that's the truth of the matter. And some Indigenous have even admitted that. We don't do it these days, but some of the children should because of the sexual abuse that is happening to them. But we turn a blind eye to it. We keep putting them back to families that are not going to protect and look after those children. But we don't do it to non-Indigenous families. We take the children away. Is that right for the children? How many of you in this chamber have actually been to these Aboriginal communities? Have actually seen what is happening? You know, children on the streets in the middle of the night, children in fear to going home to their homes because of the abuse, the alcohol and drug abuse, the sexual abuse. These are young children. Why is it my fault because I'm white? Why is it not the community's fault? Why are we turning a blind eye to this? These are the problems that we really need to ask a question. Do you think a voice to Parliament is going to change all this? And Senator Thorpe was right. They want Senate seats in this place purely allocated to the Indigenous. Why? Even Senator Farrell asked me a couple of years ago, would I support an increase of 14 senators per state? No, I wouldn't. We're overrepresented in this place. We don't need more senators. We need people with vision for the future of this nation. That's what we need, not more members of Parliament pushing your own agendas. This is not bringing us together. This voice to Parliament is going to be divisive. We are all Australians together. No one's taken into consideration my place in all this, or any other Australian that's been born here who's not Indigenous. Do you really care about the fact that I'm part of this land? Just because you can say that you've got a connection with this land for 65,000 years, I don't care. All I've heard it raised from 40,000, 50,000, 60,000, 65,000, and I've even heard 100,000. Just because you got your cave paintings and your dream time and you have this connection with the land, what about my connection with this land? What about the farmers? What about the people who work the land? What about the defence personnel? What about the people who've died, sacrificing their lives for our freedom and for this nation? Every person who would put their life down to protect our country from freedom, for freedom, they have every right to this land. To say that you have a connection to the land, to the waters, to the environment. I actually went up to Palm Island. I remember the conversation with the Aboriginals up there who asked for my assistance, which I did all that I possibly can to help them with their hospital issue, the education, the housing. Disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. And if you remember my interview, Charlie Perkins was there. And he said, you have no idea the connection that we have with the land. And I said, if you've got that much of a connection, why don't you clean it up? And this is, you know, there's more to it than that. It's about the fact we are all Australians. We cannot change what has happened in this nation. We cannot turn back the hands of time. We acknowledge what's happened. But to think that you can actually give people authority, voices to Parliament, and it's going to make things better? It's people who have the intestinal fortitude to call it out for what it is. It's people who will fight against those being called racist because you dare challenge anything. The word racist means nothing these days. It's about being a member of Parliament to represent all Australians. And I come to the point where we're being lied to. Even Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, who's in the chamber today, he said the voice of Parliament could be challenged. In the High Court, there's no guarantees. And then you have here, in the Australian front page of the paper, it says Indigenous voice to Parliament, yes, campaigner Thomas Mayo's radical vision. As he says here, threatened that politicians would be punished if they ignored the voice advisory body. Went on to say the voice of Parliament being the first step towards reparations and compensation for Indigenous Australians. More money, more greed, more power, more control. And then it says the power of the voice was its ability to punish politicians that ignore our advice on legislation and funding. Is this your truth-telling? Is this what you mean? So someone who's been caught on videotape saying this? Or the fact is, we are going to use the rule book of the nation to force them. And what I've already spoken about, and as Senator Thorpe has said, is to pay the rent, for example. How do we do that in a way that is transparent and that actually sees reparations and compensation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people beyond what we say and do at a rally? And also, it is a way to further what we need for our people in any negotiations for treaties and for other things like legislation, reform and abolishment of the old colonial institutions. What's that mean? Reform and abolishment of the old colonial institutions. You see, that's why I said in my opening statement, there is so much confusion, so many lies. You haven't been upfront with the people. You haven't declared exactly what you're intending. And as I've said and I'll tell the people, my views is that I believe that you intend to form a state within the country, a black state in this nation. And you intend to actually allocate seats in Parliament to the Indigenous. See, all you're doing is put the wording into the Constitution and you are going to make the legislation yourself. As I think it was Minister Watt said on the floor here one time, he said, we will actually have the voice in the Constitution and then we will actually draft the legislation to suit. And that's what the Australian people must consider. You have no idea what their intentions are because they're not being truthful with you. You need to know the truth. Everyone needs to know the truth. And I call on those Indigenous Australians to actually consider this hatred that's been peddled, this racism over a period of time, that has to stop. When you have a senator in this place that gets out and says, this is war, that's why the confusion with our youth, the crimes that are committed, what happens on the streets in Alice Springs was disgraceful, in Townsville and other places around this country. It's about us all working together to find the answers to it. The voice to Parliament's not it. You've got the voice. You've got a big voice now as it is. You've got more representation in this Parliament per the numbers of Indigenous who claim to be Indigenous. And that's another thing. You haven't even got the guts to even admit that there is identity fraud in this nation. You've knocked back my bill. You have knocked back our Senate inquiry into it. Why? When you have people jumping on bandwagon claiming Aboriginality, you say there's going to be 24 elected representatives. Who are they? Are you going to have Bruce Pascoe? Who are you going to have on it? Lydia Thorpe? Senator Thorpe? Who are you going to have on it? Can you just imagine that? Who is going to be your voice to Parliament? Are they truly going to be Indigenous? Or is that you owe people, the right to actually have a voice and really don't want it? So be truthful with the Australian people. And I'd be surprised. You've been very disciplined, Labor. You've held your people back. You can't tell me each and every one of you agrees with this voice, but you'll have your say at the ballot box, as everyone will.
Order.
So it's... To the people of Australia, we are one people, one nation, and should be under one flag. And I am telling the people of this nation, vote no to this piece of legislation and the referendum.